This is Join Us in France, episode 184. Bonjour, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, its many quirks, its history, its language, and of course, destinations in France you want to learn about because hopefully you'll be visiting soon. On today's episode, Elise and I tell you about the Jardin du Luxembourg, or Luxembourg Garden in the 6th arrondissement in Paris, and my favorite place to go hang out in Paris. Too many people either don't know about it or don't try it, but I think it's so lovely, even a first-time visitor to Paris should go. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest with zero stress. We have a tour coming up late May, and check it out on addictedtofrance.com. Hello, Elise.
Hi, Annie.
How are you?
I am good.
Excellent. We're talking about the Luxembourg Gardens today.
Yes, indeed.
Wonderful place.
Wonderful
One of my
place.
favorites. And you're going to make me wait until the end to tell my stories. So I will.
Oh, don't cry.
But don't go into too much history because I want to get to the good stuff.
Oh, God. The history is also part of the good stuff.
I know.
We both love it, right?
Yes.
We both love
Yes.
the Luxembourg Gardens. It's one of the... just a comment, because I was thinking about this the other day as I was making some notes. It's called a garden, but it's really a park. It's what we would call a park. And I'm not sure what the difference is.
Doesn't matter, does it?
For the French, why they would call it that, why they don't call it a park. I was just sort of curious, what the difference is.
Un parc, it's just a more vulgar term. Le Jardin du Luxembourg is a much nicer sounding thing than le Parc du Luxembourg.
Well, you might not like the word
Un parc, c'est un parc zoologique, c'est un parc d'attraction, c'est un parc de... The idea that it brings to mind are completely different.
Okay, so that's because you're French.
Yeah.
Okay. Because for
we get
me...
to pick the names.
You get to pick the... Yeah, but I was like, okay. I mean, just there you are. That's a very French reaction. So there you are. It's in the Latin Quarter.
Yeah.
It's actually on the border between Saint-Germain and Latin Quarter in the 6th, technically in 6th, and it's of course on the left side. It's in the left bank, right? And it, I think you and I both agree, it's really one of the most beautiful places you can
and
go
it's
to
one
in
that
Paris.
a lot of first visitors to Paris don't go to,
Right.
which I think is a mistake.
It's a very big mistake.
I think the other day we did an episode on first time in Paris and the important ones, and you chose the Tuileries Garden, which is also lovely.
Yes.
But I think Luxembourg is even better.
Well, I agree with you that it is perhaps more beautiful. It's classier in some way because of the way it's been kept up all of this time. It's also a bit smaller. And maybe because it's in a quieter part of Paris compared to the Tuileries, that also, I think, adds to its atmosphere because it's not surrounded by the noise of the cars on the Seine and all of that, it's, but the Luxembourg Gardens is in fact a park that was built around a palace. The palace is still there.
Yes.
The palace is now the home of the French Senate.
Right.
And
actually, the Senate owns the garden.
And the Senate owns everything there.
Yes.
And that is, of course, that's a more or less recent past event, the fact that they own it. It's since only the middle of the 19th century. But the big palace there, there are actually 3 buildings that are the center of the gardens. The first one to exist was a small palace that is off to the side, actually, when you walk into the big gates, there are many, many entrances and exits. You don't necessarily see it unless you come in from what would be the west side of the park.
Right, if you come in from Rue Vaugirard.
Right. You have actually two entrances.
Yeah.
But if you come in from there, you have the very, very big palace, which is the reason why there is a garden and a park. But the original building, which was started way before that, which was started somewhere in the end of the 1300s, beginning of the 1400s, was a very small, we could probably call it house or palace, that was built by and owned by the Duke of Luxembourg, which was a title. It wasn't that he was from Luxembourg.
Right.
It was that he was some member of the royalty. And like all the royalty, when they were given a title, they had to be given a title that was attached to some place.
Le duc de ceci, de cela, de machin.
They gave them out like we give out cards, and chocolates at Christmas time. Right? And so it stayed in his family for a very long time.
And we still do this in French. French people give a lot of first names to their kids. They used to give more. It was like normal to have like 4 or 5 first names.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from this idea of you're important if you have more titles and more names.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Because they had real names, and then they would be the Duke of, Count of, whatever it was, So it was just like a mini city palace that had a teeny little garden and an orangery. And I think we've talked about orangeries. Orangeries are places that very wealthy royalty aristocrats had. It showed how wealthy they were because it was basically a kind of enormous hothouse where they could keep citrus and they could grow exotic plants. And what happens is that existed for quite a long time. And then in the beginning of the 17th century, in the early 1600s, you have the King Henry IV, a king we've talked about, actually, when we talked about Pope.
But I haven't released that episode yet.
Okay.
You'll hear that one soon.
Okay. So there's this wonderful king named Henry IV who's married to a Medici. And his wife is Marie de Medici. And she was born in Florence and grew up in...
Not Catherine.
No, Catherine was the wife of Henry II who came. They were actually distant cousins, but they were all members of the Medici crowd.
Okay. So that was not a stupid question, by the way.
No, that was not a stupid question.
For once.
No, and in fact, to be very honest, I always have a little bit of a hesitation of remembering which one of the two
is Marie, which one
was Catherine, which one was Marie, and blah, 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 all of that. Yeah. Okay, so anyway.
This one is Marie de Medici.
This is Marie. This is Marie. M&Ms. Okay. This is Marie de Medici. And so she was the wife of Henry IV. And she grew up in the Petit Palace, which is a very beautiful, enormous palace in Florence, in Italy. And that palace has a very famous garden called the Luxembourg Gardens. And at the age of 25, she was brought to France to marry Henry IV. They proceeded to have a whole bunch of children. And in 1610, he was assassinated. And she became regent.
By Ravignac?
By Ravaillac. I think.
Someone like that.
And she was a very strong-willed, headstrong kind of woman who really would like to take charge of things. And when her husband was assassinated, she was made regent, which meant that she could govern in the name of.
Right.
And it was because her son, who turned out to be Louis XIII, was a minor.
Too young.
They became major. I guess we call that major, at 12.
An adult.
So he was a kid. He was really small.
12, an adult at 12.
Yeah, well, he
Are you
was.
kidding me?
That they were brought up to be like that, right?
I met 12-year-olds.
And what he did to his mom, you wouldn't want to know about either. But anyway, so and she hated the Louvre, and she hated all of these old rustic, what she thought primitive-looking buildings because the Italians were much more sophisticated and much more.
It's true, they are.
They certainly, at the time, were.
Even today, you walk around Rome and you're like a bunch of show-offs. That's what I do.
So when her husband was assassinated, she decided, because she couldn't do it before then, because he wouldn't have allowed it, she decided that she wanted to build herself a brand new palace and gardens that reminded her of home, because she was very homesick.
All right.
And so she employed all of the best architects, and she brought Italian park designers and hydraulic engineers. She actually had them come to live in France, and they stayed in France, 2 brothers who were called the Francini brothers. And she asked them to design a park around what became this enormous palace, which is the Luxembourg Palace. And it started...
it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous. And it was actually begun in 1615. And by 1625, 10 years later, enough of it was built for her to actually start living in it. And she designed it to be majestic. We don't, as you know, we were just talking about it. It's not open except for the weekend de patrimoine.
Right, you can't visit the actual Senate.
You can't visit because it's
Weekend du patrimoine, so that's twice a year.
Once.
Oh, just once a year?
Once.
Just in September?
Just in September.
Okay.
And I'm thinking maybe I'm going to go that weekend to Paris because I would love. I've seen some pictures. I would love to see the inside of it.
Yeah,
you have to stand online though for 3 hours to get inside.
There's a bunch of things that would be good to see.
That would be
there.
good to see.
Yeah.
So this is what happens. She wants something that's Italian. And she asks them to make this magnificent palace. She hires the painter Rubens, who is the big man at the time. Who, of course,
from Holland?
He's Flemish. But very attached to the French court. Mm-hmm. And she commissions 24 paintings from him because she didn't have a small ego. And she wants these paintings to be the life cycle of Maria de Medici and her husband, the King Henry IV.
Yeah.
If you want to see these paintings now, you go to the wing that holds them in the Louvre. They're unbelievable.
Right.
Unbelievable.
So it's a special Rubens room?
It's a special Rubens room. And it has... These are huge, huge, huge paintings. Mm-hmm. If you look at the original floor plans, if you go online and you see the original floor plans, she had a whole wing of the palace designed just to show this enormous cycle of the life of Maria de Medici and her husband.
Nice.
So this is the original reason for the palace. She bought the land from the Duke of Luxembourg, but kept the name.
Okay.
She didn't care. I mean, it wasn't her problem. It's like she didn't want to make it the Medici Gardens.
So long as I have my paintings.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting considering what she wanted. She didn't say, "Oh, we're going to make this the Medici Palace or the Medici Gardens." It was cool. She said, "Okay, whatever." And then
Jardin du Luxembourg. It's a lovely name.
It's a lovely name. Yeah. She also bought up, as a queen could, a part of land that was just behind it that belonged to a monastery, so that all in all, she had basically. Over 30 hectares, which is a pretty good size.
Right. It's a little smaller than that today.
Yes. Because what happened was that in the 19th century, when the Baron Haussmann started destroying lots of medieval Paris, he actually lopped off a chunk of what was the original park. So, and the other things that she did, which is, of course, one of the special things that you go to see when you go into the gardens, is the famous Medici fountain.
Right.
Now that she did name after herself.
Right.
Or they named it after her.
It's not a huge fountain.
It's not a huge one.
No, it's nice.
But what it is, and this is one of the things I didn't know until I was doing some of this research, is that the fountain that you see today, first of all, was originally in a different place. I don't know how you do that, but they actually moved the whole thing, the structure and the
if
water.
money is no object.
They took it. It was originally on the west side of the palace.
Okay.
And they moved it to where it is now, which is right next to the palace, but on the east side when you go in the main entrance there. And the original fountain did not include the reflecting pool that is in front of it.
Ah, okay. It was just a fountain.
It was just a fountain. It is literally a replica of the one she loved when she was growing up in Florence.
Okay.
And what happened was that it was in the 19th century that a couple of sculptors under Louis Philippe, he decided he wanted to add some things to the gardens.
Okay.
So they added the reflecting pool and a bunch of other sculpture to it. So even though it's still known as the Medici fountain.
And nowadays, that fountain really needs to be scraped and cleaned up. It's very dark. It's almost black.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure if it was cleaned up, it would look much nicer than it does.
Well, part of it is that, of course, it's surrounded by all those big trees. There's a lot of stuff that falls down on it. But you're absolutely right. It's kind of
by comparison to the palace.
Yes.
The palace is this beautiful, creamy stone.
Which has been recently cleaned up.
Right, it's been cleaned up. It's beautiful. And then you go not very far and you see the fountain and you go, that's dark.
Yeah.
I pick up on things like that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So the other thing that she did, which means we're still talking about the 1600s, is she asked for a park or garden, whichever word you want to use, that would be, of course, behind the palace. That would be symmetrical.
Yeah.
And that would have these magnificent ramps and balustrades with this beautiful round pond and fountain in the center with a one-point perspective, because this is the Renaissance, and of course everything had to be done in that style.
Right.
And what is interesting to know, and one of the things I found out, is that all of the incredible sculpture in the park is not from the time that she designed it. It's from the 19th century.
Right. It's much later. I want to talk about that later.
And so I was originally under the impression that that was part of the original design, but it wasn't. So she created this palace. She had made these gardens. She brought these Italian workers who became naturalized French and stayed and worked on Versailles and a whole bunch of other places at the same time afterwards. And of course, one of the things that did happen is that in 1642, her son, Louis XIII, kicked her out. They didn't have a very strong agreement on how to run the country, and she wanted to stay queen.
Yes.
And he was now a full adult.
Old enough.
And had his own strong ideas about what to do. So basically, he exiled her. And she went to one of her other palaces. And so that was the end of the time that she actually lived in the palace. And it was turned into the Senate after the French Revolution, and it has been the Senate ever since. Now, that's talking about the actual palace. It was, for a while, a museum. And then what they did was they took the small building that had originally belonged to the Duke of Luxembourg.
Right, the smaller palace.
And that is now a beautiful art museum.
That I've never been into.
That is wonderful. It has usually exhibits.
It would be good if it's a rainy day. That would be a good plan.
It's a great thing to do because it's so close to where we usually stay and things like that. And it's expensive because it's not a municipal museum.
Define expensive.
I think that because it's always temporary exhibits. I think it's between 15 and 18 euros, and it's not included in the museum pass.
Right, it's not in the museum pass, but that's not. I mean, if you go to museums in New York, it's $35, $50.
Well, that we know, of course. So, it's had some great shows there, and it always has an interesting show, and it's basically a painting exhibit that's there.
Okay.
And then you have next to the Senate, which, as I mentioned, is only open one weekend out of the year for people to actually go inside. All of the Rubens, of course, were moved to the Louvre.
Right.
Most of the other decoration, too.
It's good to know that, because if you like Rubens and if you are going to the Louvre and you want to have a more targeted visit to the Louvre instead of wandering around like a zombie, which is what most people do,
right?
Just look up where those paintings are by Rubens and just go straight there.
Right.
And spend an hour there. You'll be delighted, and then get out.
Yeah. And
that's a really good way to see the Louvre.
If I'm not mistaken, it's actually called the Maria de Medici wing or something like that.
Be, yeah.
I mean, it's just...
Google it.
It's her and Henry IV and all of that.
Yeah.
She's nice and she's Rubenesque, as they say, nice and fleshy. I don't know if she really was in real life, but he certainly made her look that way. So the palace, of course, has always been prestigious. And has, of course, now it's a public governmental building, which is why you have the soldiers and the gendarmes around it all the time.
Right, it's well protected, yeah.
It's very well protected. But of course,
it could be closed if there's a terror alert or something.
They
could shut it down. I mean, remember, they own it. I've never seen it shut down, but it could happen.
No. And the other thing is that, of course, what she wanted was a formal garden, which was, of course, what she had grown up with. It was later on, in the beginning of the 19th century, that they took the southwestern corner of it and they turned it into an English garden. And it's the only part of the Luxembourg Gardens
that's not symmetrical.
Yeah. And of course, because an English garden means you have windy little paths, and the perspective is different from every point of view. And right in that corner is one of my favorite things in the park, which is the orchards. And the orchards, which are pear and apple experimental orchards, were originally begun by the monks that lived in the monastery that was part of that piece of land that had been appropriated. So they kicked the monks out, but they kept the orchards.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an agricultural station.
You keep the monks or you keep the pears?
You keep the pears. It keeps and what's fun is
I know what French people are going to do.
When you walk through that area, you have the little, what do you call them? Labels. That indicate the year that certain variety of pear or apple were created. And you can go there in the spring, you'll see it flowering. If you go there in the summer, you see the fruit come out. I love that part of it, interestingly. Yeah. And of course, there's a marionette show.
Yeah.
And the park...
Do you want me to talk about all the things that are in there? Because I got plenty to say.
Sure, talk about... I just wanted to finish by saying that it's now 28 hectares.
Right. And 21 of them are open to the public.
And 21
are open. 23. 23 hectares.
It's only 23.
And 21 of them are open to the public.
And
which makes it teeny tiny by comparison. For example, other big cities have lovely parks, right?
Right.
Central Park, how big?
Oh, I have no idea.
Central Park is 315 hectares.
Right. It's a park as opposed to a garden.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's nothing but grass.
Right.
Pretty much.
Well,
when I went, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit disparaging for the big parks in other big cities, but Central Park, to me, feels like, unless you're running, you could spend a week walking around and seeing nothing but grass.
There are other things there.
There's a few things.
There are ponds, there's a lake, there's a theater, there's a zoo.
But it's so big that it's not the enjoyment of having it all together in a small space.
But you know...
that's what Paris does right.
But to what you said earlier, Central Park is a park, which means it has a lot of things in it, just like Bois de Boulogne or Parc of
Vincennes.
It's not a garden.
Right.
It actually is very varied. It's much more varied than I think you realize because it has all kinds of things in it. It has a Shakespearean theater. It has a restaurant.
It has a lot of things, but everything is far apart.
It's big.
Right.
It's meant to be big.
Whereas when you go to the Luxembourg Gardens, you can see the next thing visually that's interesting. And it's not that far off. And it's really enticing. And for me, when I go to Central Park, I'm like, well, I have no idea where anything is. And I can't see anything interesting around me besides grass. I see grass and trees.
There are lots of different
and paths,
things.
But I don't know where they take me. Anyway, I don't. That's not the kind of experience.
Gardens, then.
Yeah, it's not the kind of experience I like. And it's the same thing with Hyde Park. Hyde Park is humongous.
I don't know the parks.
That's in London. It's 256 acres. So by comparison, Luxembourg is 23 acres.
But it's not a park.
It's a garden.
It's a garden.
And it's human-sized. Yeah. And you can visually see all these beautiful things. And it's really enticing. Like, oh, what's there? What's that over there? And you walk to it because you want to see what it is. I love that. That's one of the things that it's one of my favorite places in Paris because there's so much, and every time you go, you discover something different. So some of the things that are there, obviously the French Senate, like you said. You have the ponds.
You have the ponds.
You have the Medici fountain and reflecting pond. You have the big circular pond in the middle,
which has
the little boats that you can rent. Right, and it's not just kids. It's plenty of grown people.
Talking about
renting the boats.
I have to defend Central Park because they have the same thing.
They have that too, yes.
And of course, they got the idea from Luxembourg
Gardens. And
it's
cute. Yeah. It's just too far apart.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say. So they have this beautiful pond in the middle. They have a big children's playground. And I think you pay like €3 per child for them to go in.
I don't know. You have to pay to go in?
Yeah. It's a few euros. It's not very much, but it's a few euros. Some parts of it are more appropriate for younger, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. There's things that could be up to 10 or a small 12 or something. But it's about that age bracket. And it's very fun. There's some benches and a covered area where people invite their friends for birthday parties and things like that. It's very lovely. You have a puppet show.
Marionettes.
Alors, that one is a classic French puppet show. It's Guignol.
And it's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's old. So I have to tell you a little bit about Guignol because it's not the type of entertainment that will suit everybody because it's very much like an English pantomime. It's not a scripted show. So they have like 2 or 3 characters. There's the good and the very, very evil. And the children participate. So the children will yell out, look behind you. And of course, the guy never looks behind him, And it's kind of...
It's, I think, based on Commedia dell'arte.
It could be, but it started in Lyon with Monsieur Guignol. He was a tooth puller. And he realized that if he had a little puppet show going on while he was pulling people's teeth, he got more customers. And then he made it into a set piece. And at Christmas time, you will have Santa will appear, and at Easter you have the bunnies and the bells, and it's seasonal. They change the characters, but it's all in French, obviously, and it's all done to interact with the children. So, and that one I think is like €10 or something to get into. If your children speak 0 French, if they're very young, it might entertain them because it's colorful and it moves and stuff. But if they're 12, don't. They're going to go, what? There's no special effects. It's really, really basic. It's 2 or 3 people behind a curtain pulling these things and telling, and interacting with the kids. I love it, but I understand the silly jokes. And if you don't understand the silly jokes...
Right.
Je vois pas l'intérêt. Anyway, so that's that. You have a wonderful pétanque club. Pétanque is the ball game, the almost bocce ball, but for the French style.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah, kind of. And they're super friendly. So what it is they have like 5 or 6 terrains de boule. They're all parallel. And if you go watch them for a bit, they will actually come talk to you and invite you to come play. Now, the thing is, in France, to play pétanque, you have to have a license. Just like any sport, you have to have a license. Oui, une licence de pétanque. At any pétanque thing in France, anywhere, they won't let you play unless you have your license. But thankfully, the license is like €20. And they introduced me when I was there. I was taking photos. I was talking to them saying, can I take photos and whatever. And they said, you should join the club. And we have the equipment over there you can borrow, whatever. And there were people from all over the world who joined the club. And that's the only time they play pétanque. They go and they play for a few hours when they're in Paris. But they're super friendly. I was really surprised. So if you want to try pétanque, that's where you go. They're very good. You have the small Statue of Liberty. It's a
Bertoldi.
Right. And I think it's actually one of the original molds that he was testing things on. I don't know if that one is number 2 or number 3. There's another one of the same size at the Arts et Métiers, Musée des Arts et Métiers. But it's one of the ones that came before the one that you see in New York. You have a music kiosk.
Yes.
And the music kiosk often has a band playing, and your mileage may vary. Some of the ones I've heard were like, they need to practice.
And sometimes singers.
Yes, could be singers, could be a band, could be, they reserve the spot to do public things. Of course, there are paths around for joggers.
Yeah.
There are wonderful chairs. Those chairs, the little green chairs with the...
Well, some of them incline and some of them are straight.
Right, and they're very nice. Very nice.
You know that in the past, until I don't know what date, you had to pay to sit on them.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now it's free.
My first 2 visits to Paris, which were a fairly long time ago, you could not sit on any of those chairs unless you paid. And since you weren't allowed to sit on the grass,
right,
there were only the stone benches available for people to sit on, which was the same in the Tuileries, by the way. And I don't even know.
But now it's not like that.
It's not like that at all. No.
Yeah, they're lovely. And you see people sitting there forever,
hours.
Talking.
Well, they take the sun there.
Right, taking the sun, reading, chatting, laughing. You always have visitors who bring a bottle of wine
you have
and
groups
share.
Of people who sit there. Yeah.
Right, they have a picnic or they share. I've seen very often people whose hotel rooms, because there's a lot of hotels around the area.
Yes.
So people whose hotel rooms are not quite ready, they go with their luggage. They go sit at the Luxembourg Garden waiting for the hotel room to open, which is not a bad thing to do, really. Might as well.
There are 2 cafes.
There's some cafes, very small, little
with
kiosk.
crepes.
Oh, there's crepes, okay.
Yeah, they make crepes. They make crepes and they make good coffee too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a full meal, but it's, you can get a snack.
Right.
It's nice. Let's see. It's very scenic. Like the trees, this is something they do a lot in Paris, but the trees are cut in this rectangular shape. And they're kept in this beautiful rectangular shape.
For perspective.
Right, for perspective. I'll put pictures. I've been there so many times that I have lots of photos. And so if you want to visit vicariously, you can go to, it's going to be joinusinfrance.com/184.
The topiary stuff is to maintain the original idea of the one-point perspective that was originally created. And of course, it contrasts very, very strongly with the little corner that's the English garden part, because you have all of this manicured, shaped shrubbery and lawns and symmetrical things. And then if you go off to one little corner, it's like you're walking into another
world.
Again. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
No, it's very interesting. And then, of course, you have les Reines de France et Femmes Illustres. So it's called that because it's the Queens of France and illustrious women. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge collection of women.
Yeah.
They are mostly mothers of French kings or wives of French kings, or usually both. It came about in the late 1800s because one day they woke up to the fact that there were no statues of women anywhere in Paris. They were like, how did we manage that? We have thousands of statues and not a single woman. It's a bit like,
I know how they managed that.
Yeah. But it's a bit what's happening today.
Right.
It just, it was much earlier, and they didn't push the logic quite as far as they needed to, but there's a few interesting women there. You have Clotilde, you have Margaret of Provence, you have Anne of Brittany, and they're all labeled. And most of them you can still read the label pretty well. When I have visitors that tell them about some of them and some of the stories, most of them, these women had terrible lives. But
well, they were queens, but in France, a queen never had any power.
Right.
So she was the wife of.
Right, but then you also have Sainte Geneviève, just saint. Mm-hmm. So it's not just queens. It's it's a bit of Blanche de Castille is there, Marguerite de Navarre. Anyway, a bunch of them, and they're lovely to look at. It's
very 19th century,
right? And you will often see groups of school children with their teachers coming. When it's the joy of living in a French city is that when you go to school, it doesn't take very long for your teacher to take you to see what you're talking about. Right. So if you're doing a lesson on, I don't know, Blanche de Castille, which probably doesn't happen, but then you could just take them, show them. And you see groups of kids there. It's one of the loveliest things to do in Paris, and I really want to encourage you to go. Now, what's around there? Because there's also stuff right around there that's really nice. The Pantheon is less than a kilometer away.
Oh, it's not. It's just 3 blocks away.
Yeah,
it's right to the east of it.
You can see it, and we talked about it in episode 71. If you want to learn more about that, if you exit the park not very far from the Medici fountain, and you walk along Rue Soufflot,
right. You cross Boulevard Saint-Michel.
Right. And right ahead of you, you see this very big stately building with a dome.
Huge
and columns. And that's the Pantheon. It's really easy to recognize. Off to the side, on the left of the Pantheon, you have my favorite church in Paris, Saint-Étienne-du-Mont. Just gorgeous.
Which has this famous rood screen. Right.
If you can go in, it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's worth a good hour. And also there you have she's shaking her head.
No, not at all for me. No. It's worth 15, 20 minutes and not more.
Oh, okay. No, I love it. Yeah, just look at all this stuff. And I think, how did they make that? Or I try to get a good picture. That's probably what takes me a long time is to try and get a good picture of things. Also, off to the side right there, right by I don't know if it's attached to the church. itself or not, but you have the steps.
Oh yeah, the steps for the movie.
The magical steps.
Right.
You know, if you watch Midnight in Paris, every night he goes to wait for the magical car. Well, those are the steps where you wait. So it's worth a little stroll in that direction. Of course, you also have the Saint-Germain-des-Prés neighborhood, not far at all.
Which is really on the other side, north and west.
On the other side of what?
On the other side of the park. In other words, you're talking about the east side of the park.
Yeah.
If you go north and west, you get into the very, very chic Saint-Germain area.
Right. And so to go there, you exit next to the Senate building, right? And you go straight down, and you're walking down Rue Tournon. Yeah.
There are actually two, one on each side.
There's a couple you could take, but it's in that direction. And that's a neighborhood that's worth walking through.
It's very beautiful.
It's beautiful. The stores are beautiful. You know, you have nice stores. It's lively. It's not on a Sunday, obviously, but if you go on a day when the stores are open, it's good.
The other building that's right across the street on that side is the Theater of the Odeon.
Yeah, but that's boring.
Oh, no, it's not. Oh, no, it's not. It's not boring at all. It's a building.
See, she doesn't like churches.
Churches are interesting. It depends on what's in them. But it's a gorgeous building from Louis XIV. It is magnificent, absolutely magnificent, the architecture.
Yeah, I'm sure
you can visit outside, you can visit inside. Oh, no. I think it's gorgeous. It's elegant. It's classical architecture, and it's a perfect example of architecture of the early 1700s. That's absolutely beautiful.
The other thing that you have not too far from the Luxembourg Garden is the Marie Curie Museum. That one is Sorbonne.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's 600 or 700 meters, but it's off to another side. But you know, just look it up with your Google Maps.
It's on the same side as the Pantheon, no?
No. C'est à
west.
I don't know the directions like that. If you're looking straight at the Pantheon, Marie Curie is
to the right.
Yeah, she's 3:00.
Okay, so south of it. Yeah.
But it's a lovely little museum. I talked about it in episode 79 with like a short bio of Marie Curie's life, and she was amazing. So there's plenty to do right around there. I also happen to think it's a lovely area to stay in if you like a little bit of quiet and posh.
And smaller buildings. Not bigger buildings, because it's the other side of the river that has the bigger buildings mostly.
And you'll probably pay quite a bit for the hotel rooms. This is not a cheap area. But by quite a bit, I mean 200 and up. Okay. But it's really lovely. That's the thing with Paris. Paris has a lot of pretty small, cute little parks. Some of them really, really small. Some of them really
there are a couple, I guess, that are smaller, but...
yeah, no, it's
they're
very
all
nice.
Beautiful though.
So if you're going to Paris, even if it's your first time, I would really recommend that you spend time and a couple of hours. You don't need hours and hours and hours walking through the Luxembourg Garden. You will feel a little bit of French life that's genuine
and
posh and history. Yeah. It's genuine. It's posh. It's historical. It's pleasant.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah, you will see. I mean, it's very scenic. You will see the Tour Montparnasse in the background, which is not the nicest view, but there it is. I mean, from there you really see it big.
And in the recent past, something that I really like is that the whole park. Gardens is surrounded by these very beautiful iron gates.
Yeah.
And since about 10 years ago, not more, there are these incredible photography exhibits on the outside of the gates.
Yes,
and they change. I don't know if it changes once a year. I think it's only once a year, but they're wonderful. They're usually thematic.
Yeah.
And they're huge blown up versions. And what was it the last time? It was old castles all over France or something like that. Sometimes it's
all the time,
seasons. I mean, they're just beautiful. So it's a nice, and there are ice cream vendors. It's a lovely place for all of that. You know, lots of wonderful little cafes and crepe places right across the street as well.
Right, there's a little cafe that we like, Le Petit Suisse.
The Petit Suisse,
Rue Vaugirard,
which is wonderful, but boy, you have to wait for a seat.
Well, sometimes you do, yeah. I've walked right in. If it's not summer, you walk right in. It's one of these places that has a lot of charm and Parisian charm, and you will see people spending hours there. And also, I want to point out that there are people who bring bottles of wine. This is typically what Americans do. It's a bit crass, but it's not forbidden.
Right.
So they won't... Okay, somebody asked on the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, somebody asked the rules. So I looked it up. The open container rules in France are very lax, unless you're a homeless person.
Oh.
They really come down on homeless people. They do it on purpose. And they also do crack down on student drunkenness when they know that an area, a lot of students tend to aggregate and drink to excess. They crack down on that and they will make that street or that area, no open containers everywhere unless you're sitting at a bar
But what
or a
is
cafe.
the rule, actually? Do you know?
That's the thing. The rule is you can have an open beer or a glass of wine in public in France unless they've decided to crack down. And and mayors often will have ordinances that are specific to one plaza or one street or even a section of a street, because and those ordinances are temporary. It's just to fix a problem that they have there. But then you're 50 meters away and nobody cares. And nobody ever gives a hard time to foreign visitors anyway, because, you're in Paris, you want to let loose. It's fine.
And they don't worry about asking you how old you are.
No, they should, but they don't.
They don't. They don't.
Yeah, eventually, we'll get to the point where supermarkets, big chain supermarkets, ID young-looking kids. But last time I was in Utah, somebody asked me for my ID. I'm 50. I'm almost 53.
They asked you for your ID?
Yeah, to buy a bottle of wine.
Maybe they thought you were too old.
I was like... I don't know if I should be charmed or annoyed, but here it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's a problem, because if you don't have an American ID, I still have an expired American driver's license, which I use in those cases. But a French ID doesn't have a date on it. It has your birth date, but it's all different. And if you produce that to an American clerk, they're going to go, what is that? I don't know. Anyway.
Just to remind everybody, too, that the Luxembourg Garden is part of the area that we spend a lot of time in when we do our tour in Paris.
Yeah.
And the
it's
hotels,
where we start, actually.
That's where we start. It's the hotels we stay in are really close by.
Yeah.
And I think we still have a couple of openings.
We have some openings for the tour in Paris. I can still take some people for Giverny, for Versailles, and one for Normandy.
And for the tour itself.
Yes.
We still have some spots.
Yes, we still have some spots. We'd love to have more people. So to see that, it's addictedtofrance.com. Oh, and there's also free Wi-Fi at Luxembourg. Any park, like any fenced park in Paris, you have free Wi-Fi. So
isn't that... Oh, I didn't... I thought it was true pretty much everywhere.
No, just the parks.
Okay.
Just the parks. All right, Elise, I think we have done it.
I think we have.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
And we hope to see you in the Luxembourg Garden on one of our tours. Maybe.
On one of our tours.
Or not. It's okay. If you want to do it by yourself, it's okay. It's beautiful. Go anyway. Au revoir.
Bye.
Thank you for signing up to support the show on Patreon this week. David Steinberg, Leah Carlson, and Claudine Hemingway. Your support is much appreciated. I give liberally on this podcast, and when you reciprocate, it encourages me greatly. And my thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. I know you don't have to, but you want to, and it's really encouraging to me. This week, I have been reading about the secret correspondence between Marie Antoinette and a man who played a big role in her life, Axel de Fersen. Their correspondence was scandalous, to say the least, because Everybody wondered if these two were having an affair, and as you know, there's nothing worse than a French queen having an affair. French kings, well, they could sleep around all they wanted, they could make illegitimate children left and right, but they wanted to make sure that the queens stayed virtuous, so they knew that the children they produced were royal indeed. So, a queen having an affair, that was a big deal. The descendants of Alex de Fersen kept the letters that he and Marie Antoinette exchanged, but they redacted a lot of the sentences with thick black ink. Historians have known about the letters for a long time, but all the juicy bits were redacted. Well, what do you know? Using the latest technologies, they've been able to read through the redactions. And yep, they were in love with each other. But did they have an affair or was it only platonic? I don't know yet. I have to keep reading. So I'll make that the next French history brief for Patreon supporters next month because it's an incredible story and I want to keep learning about it. And I think you'll want to know about it too. I have also added a new reward tier for people who want to support the show at the level of $2 a month. These patrons will get 2 of my best photos of France each month. I will also share with you the details of where and when I took the photo, the camera, the lens, and most importantly, the camera settings. Most of us don't care about these things, but photography buffs, they care a lot about these things. These will be natural photos of France with minimal editing and zero Photoshop because I don't know how to use Photoshop and I don't have time to learn. So for $2 a month, you get the photos. For $5 a month, you get the photos, Lunch Break French, and the French History Brief, which are really 2 extra episodes of the show per month. And when you sign up today, you get all the previous rewards too. Check it all out on patreon.com/join us, Patreon, and join us with no spaces or dashes or anything. It's all explained there, and thank you so much for your support. For my personal update, well, it's the middle of the winter in France, but hey, middle of February, spring is just around the corner, and I am so ready for spring. I know a lot of you are going to be visiting France soon, so I hope your preparations are going well. I'm happy to answer your questions. Call the voicemail to ask, and the number is 1-801-806-1015. I'll repeat that in a minute at the end of the show. My preparations for the upcoming tour are going well. I love doing the research to make the tours the best they can be, with lots of interesting anecdotes and stories that have to do with the places we'll be visiting. Last Saturday, I decided to grab my camera and go for a walk in the streets of Toulouse to get some good pictures. The weather was cold but sunny, so I put on some layers and I went. What a fun way to spend a day. It occurred to me that one of the things that make for really good quality of life is the ability to get out of your house, spend time outside, either in nature or looking at your city or doing whatever it is that you enjoy doing. I know most of you don't live in France, but I'm pretty sure your city has very nice things in it too. So I want to encourage you to get out and enjoy life outside of your house. I ended up walking for 6 hours and I got a couple hundred of good photos. And I only stopped for a cup of tea and a chocolatine once, so I was strong. Next, I need to go out later in the evening to go check out all the wine bars in Toulouse. I didn't get to see them this time because by the time 6 p.m. came around, I had walked 13.5 kilometers and I was ready to go home. But I stopped at the one bar that Elise and I had mentioned last week in the episode on Toulouse. That was called The Ultimate Guide to Toulouse. The place is called Numéro 5. And it's gotten some awards for being the best wine bar in the world. So I had to go check it out, right? I got there just at opening time at 6 p.m. And I am sorry to say they were jerks. So I want to tell you about it. They used to have a bigger storefront where they could accommodate 30 or 40 people. And it was a pleasant place to go hang out. And I only went once, but it was good. But then they moved somewhere with a tiny bar space. I mean, tiny. You might have 10 people in there and that's it. But then that new place has several private rooms in the back that you only get to with a group reservation. So basically, they don't want people to walk in unless, I suppose, I don't know, but I suppose if you're famous or gorgeous or will somehow make them look good, they'll let you in. But me, no, they didn't want me in there and they made that very clear. So I take back my recommendation that you go. I tell you, do not go to the Numéro 5 wine bar in Toulouse. It's a good place for snobs and groups, not for normal people. I'll try a few of the other wine bars in the next few weeks, and I will report about them because Toulouse, like any French city, is full of really nice places to hang out in the evening and have a good time. And you don't need to go to the places where they're snobbish. For those of you who offered to be beta readers for my book, I thank you for your patience. And I have to confess that I am stopped dead in my tracks. I think I need to put it away for a few weeks and get back to it with fresh eyes. So bear with me, please. I have not forgotten about it. I just need to take a break. The best way to connect with me is via email, annie@joinusinfrance.com, or like I said before, if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, leave a message on 1-801-806-1015. Lots of people ask me questions on the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, and I do answer them there. But if instead you asked your question by leaving a voicemail message, lots more people would get to hear both the question and the answer. So don't be shy. Call 1-801-806-1015. And it's a voicemail box, so you won't be interrupting anything important or invade my privacy or anything like that, which I appreciate. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next Wednesday. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2017 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.